Hi, I'm Chris from Airwindows, and hey, you can do this. Because this is Airwindows Pear. Now, what is this thing? It is sort of the guts of filter work that I'm looking to do going forward. My idea is I need to build some serious analog console style versions of Airwindows console. And for that reason, I've been trying to evolve new forms of EQ filters. This is not a synth style filter. This is sort of a big console desk EQ type of filter in that it is meant to be transparent. Here is a raw sound of a track I did the other day. I've set it up in a console zero mix so it has lots of lows and highs and stuff. And if I turn on Pear, it doesn't sound really very different, but we can start filtering stuff out. And notice we can also use the inverse wet here. Using inverse turns it into a high pass. Using wet turns it into fully a low pass. And then dry is unfiltered. So you get sort of two shelves for the price of one. And what this does is a lot of this sounds very much the same as the dry does. We can have our hat going like this. And I've got a large number of pulls in this filter. And you can hear that the guitar, for instance, still has character and texture to it, but the hat is almost completely gone. Or we can have the hat, but not any of the lows, and that's the inverse. That's using it as a high pass. Or we could go right into the bass. You probably can't hear that unless you've got headphones or something, because that is deeply subsonic. And then the difference between dry and this is not terribly obvious. We have a certain amount of kind of bump at the roll-off there as we're getting the bass in this way. Essentially, this is the guts of what I'm going to be using to make new versions of console with. And I'm letting you have it because I like letting people have sort of skunkworks projects out of what I'm doing. You get to use it early. You don't have to wait for me to finish all the work around this. This is, again, a filter where you can have it doing this low passy thing here. And we have a pulse control, which I haven't been fooling with yet. Zero pulls means the filter is not really present. It's not engaged. As we keep adding pulls to this filter, you start to hear how it kicks in. You can still kind of hear some of the highs here, but it's already very effective. And then as we continue to switch in new pulls, you can hear a little click. That's because this is not a continuous control. This is like a bank of switches with an inverse wet on it. The frequency thing is labeled bit freak. That is because it also is using the shifting of bits inside the algorithm. I don't have to do that, and I'm not going to be doing it when I dial in frequencies for console style EQs, but this is kind of optimized. It means it's switching among different optimal filter settings. And then you can use the poles and switch in more poles to kind of shift the frequency as it goes further. Again, you can hear the switch go. This is not a continuous control, this is a switched control. You can really hear the kick of the kick drum in this. Open up it a little bit or close it down. Or with this, the inverse wet, we can use this as a high pass, and this is what my top band is going to sound like when I get into it. We can filter more and more sharply as that goes. That tends to drop it a little bit. And that's kind of how this thing works. So the deal here is you get to use this ahead of time. There is going to be a set of, like what I'm working on here. I've got my little note. I'm working on multiple things. One of them is doing more music again, like you heard the track, and I've got a version that's done fully in the Airwindows Studio. You're hearing a version of K-Plate for the reverb. For the actual track that I released, I've got the Bricasti going. I'm already learning stuff from that I will be able to incorporate into the plugins. So that pleases me pretty well. I'm pretty sure I can apply some of the stuff that I've learned, and I'm going to be doing that in Monday coding sessions going forward. I'm also working on these console plans. For instance, I think the first one I'm going to put out, that I have to get all this stuff together and dial everything in, will be ConsoleLA. And that's based on the old Quad 8 consoles that were all over the place on the West Coast in the 70s, whether that be early 70s, late 70s. It's fascinating because as near as I can tell what was happening there is people were tending to use the same consoles, but style of mixing tended to shift as you went along. People went for more and more exaggerated effects, but using the same desks. And this is the case for, I think, a lot of the Steely Dan albums. That's ConsoleLA, that's the Quad 8 console. I think there's a bunch of Frank Zappa, up to and possibly including One Size Fits All, mixed by Kerry McNabb. And the sound of it has enough in common with those Steely Dan albums. I can't prove it, I wasn't there to see, but that may also be using this type of console. So that wonderful mid-70s Frank Zappa sound has some things in common. It's not the same console that you'll get from, well, for instance, Console TG will be the famous TG 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 console, like Dark Side of the Moon, Abbey Road. I'm pretty sure Adam Hart, Mother, and Umbagumma also came off of this thing. I'm not sure, I don't really know, but there's, like, when you understand that Umbagumma's live stuff wasn't necessarily they put up a couple of mics, then you start hearing the commonalities of tone and what was done with that and how it compares to, say, Darkside. ConsoleMC, that's going to be MCI. That's going to be a lot of fun. There's interesting things about it, such as with the MCI consoles that we're familiar with, your EQ is post-fader. It's also an unusual EQ in that you had a sort of bright and a bass knob, but the mid-range tended to be pretty flat, and then you had a peak that you could add, and the peak had a really wide range of adjustment. And you can hear that on, well, for instance, Back in Black, It's a classic album that came off one of these. A bunch of other ones. Notably, well, there's a bunch of notably too, but Talking Heads, Remain in Light, and Speaking in Tongues came off of the same kind of console, and you can hear them using that mid-range boost control to punch up the click on the kick drum to ridiculous levels. And observations like that are really useful because that means I can dial in the sound of the thing based on what that click sounds like. Maybe do a test recording, take the front head off my kick drum and try to set it up so that it'll do the same thing. Make a recording and then set up the plugin so that I can get the same kind of, that early 80s Talking Heads kick drum click thing. If you've heard it, then it really jumps out. But that is not to say that there aren't other consoles that I can do. For instance, Console HE would be Helios. And there's a bunch of famous Led Zeppelin. There's a certain amount of Rolling Stones. But there's a bunch of other stuff. For instance, did you know that the Bob Marley records, those classic Bob Marley records, came off of Basing Street Studios? That's a Helios console, with one exception. Rastaman Vibration came off an MCI. And you can hear the differences. You can hear the differences in the sounds. Console AR will be a Trident A-Range. Trident A-Range had 4 controls. Instead of just being treble and mid-range with whatever that includes and a bass, it was high mids and low mids. And that's what the A-Range brought you. And I've got examples of what that stuff sounds like as well. And notably, it'll be fun to dial in some guitar distortion, do some recordings about that, and then see whether I can get in that Van Halen Fair Warning sound and fool with guitars in such a way that I can try to get that sound happening. And lastly, Console NV, Neve, of course. That being the really old transistorized desk that Console Zero weirdly reminded me of. And that's also what the my favorite Yes records came off of an old Neve console. So there's a lot to do. There's a lot to do with that stuff. There is a lot to do with the Bricasti and both getting more used to that and learning its sound, and then also putting some work into representing that sound in my own plugins. Because of course, the whole purpose of this is to get it so that you can just download Airwindows systems and be able to quickly and easily get sort of vibes like these classic records and run with them. It shouldn't be difficult to put together music, whether you're just doing it on a laptop or whatever. Put together music and have it come off like the stuff that we enjoy listening to out of the past. It's technically possible. You just have to do stuff a certain way. And I'm going to do my level best to do things in that way. So, yeah, I got my work cut out for me. But I can give you Airwindows Pear now, because that is EQ technology that I'm inventing for the purpose of applying it. I feel I can do tonally better than the biquad filters. And so my console stuff is going to be based on that because it lends itself better to a good sounding recording console emulation than to scientific measurement or whatever. And yeah, I'll get back to work. And I'll probably do more of the studio days. If you see me going live and I'm not responding to chat like I do on Mondays, it's because I'm going to try to cut a track. And much like this most recent one, which was partly cloudy, the goal is to be able to start from nothing and using those the little deck of cards that I've been making all that time ago and have never stopped actually working with. The one that I did was beginning to be based off of this stuff. And then record something, put it together, finish it up, even edit it, throw one of the AI art stuff that I fool with. I'm looking to do like digital impressionism or digital surrealism, and I've got a whole technique for going through that. People seem to like the result. As far as I'm concerned, you should be able to do that. I mean, especially if you don't have to deal with physical hardware and you've got all of my samples and things in case you had access to anything like that. You should be able to get creative, jump in, make some music, have it finished, do a final mix of it, edit it together from the pieces that you've got. That's the way that I've been doing it. I'm happy to explain how that works. Upload it and have a track done in a day. When I say I'm Chris from Airwindows and you can do this, you can do that. Seriously. I'm just trying to forge a path and show how it's possible to go through and do something like that and have it come out the way that you want. So I'll do my level best to continue forging that path, but it's not just for me to be there. I am hoping to give people the capacity to do that kind of stuff, regardless of how much gear or equipment or what kinds of resources they've got. Probably you're going to have a pretty decent computer, because don't we all need to have that? But you should be able to do this. I think people should be able to do this, and so you can do this. And I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.